And it's time for another episode of the Three Thought Podcast. And today we have two special guest appearances. And there are two professors. One former professor at the SDU, and one is currently still teaching at the American Studies program. So what are you currently teaching in, Anders?
So I'm a associate professor of American history at the University of Southern Denmark with a specialty in the 19th century American history, but of course has taught about different aspects of American culture writ large, I think. So excited to be here, glad to join you.
And that is Anders Rasmussen. And then we have Erin Cory, who was a former professor at SDU, but now...
Yeah, so I was an external lecturer in American Studies and had no business being there except that I had a PhD and I'm American. But now I'm a postdoc in refugee migration and media studies at Malmö University in Sweden. And I research like social media and young refugees and asylum seekers, and also community spaces, public art, these sorts of things.
Yeah, and just a personal anecdote. I had both of these professors, and it was a joyful moment in my studies to have these people giving knowledge to us. So, so let's get right on to this. So today's topic is about American PC culture versus Danish humor. And we have talked about PC culture before in the second episode. So if you're really interested about this kind of topic, you could always check that episode. So today we're gonna make a comparative analysis of this whole PC culture with the Danish humor. So if one of you guys, Bob or Casper, could explain the Danish humor phenomenon.
We could just briefly say that we are also in the same room and just say hi. But yeah, so I remember that in the second episode we talked about what is Danish humor and is there really a difference in the humor we have here in Denmark or in the Scandinavian countries? And personally, I would say that growing up in what you can call a traditional Danish environment and household, I would say that, as we also discussed in the second episode, we have this idea of the Danish word for hygge mixed together with the word racism in it, actually. So you could say that we have this hygge racism joke kind of vibe, that it is okay to make fun of minorities and differences in sort of people's appearances and backgrounds, as long as it doesn't hurt them directly. And that is sort of I can feel that going to university and growing up in a whole nother environment, I can look back at my past and see that, okay, maybe not all of it was kind of fun. And when I go back to my family back home in Zealand, I sort of laugh with some kind of nervous vibe, because they still do it. I experience it like every time I talk to my dad. He has this kind of hygge racism joke vibe going on, and I just like, that was fun. But I sort of get why these jokes are made, because it is sort of in the gene. I would not say exactly in the gene, but it is in the history of creating humor in the Danish environment, sort of seeing people that are different from your own culture and say, oh, what can you say keep them from being part of our culture in some kind of way, and what differs in their culture compared to ours. And it is, I can see the humor in seeing other people, for example, worshipping cows as they do in India, and you say, oh, that is strange and weird, and oh, they don't do the same thing as we do, so it is kind of funny. But that is predominantly sort of my background on the PC culture and Danish humor.
I have always seen the difference between American humor and Danish humor, where Danish humor is more crude and a lot more sarcastic than American humor is. And as Cass was talking about this racism, or I think maybe the best way to translate it, basically casual racism.
Casual racism, yeah.
Is something that I believe every Dane knows about, and I don't think everybody does it from bad intent, or I know people don't do it from bad intent, but of course sometimes they definitely go over the line, where it basically goes from casual fun racism to basically just racism. But I think the biggest difference is just this sarcastic way of making jokes and saying things that Danish people don't really mean, to kind of try to emphasize the absurdity of these thoughts. That's what was the way I always are thinking about the Danish humor and the way we are, basically talking to each other.
So before we get to my opinion on the matter, do you have any opinions on the Danish humor or the American PC culture? Erin, obviously you're an American coming to Denmark. It must be some kind of a cultural shock.
Yeah, I mean it is, but I think that we can't really overstate. I mean, I think it's possible to overstate this sort of difference, right? I mean, there is American PC culture, but there's also a whole lot of racism still in the States, right? And there's historically, like in Denmark, a lot of humor has been about difference and has been based on racial stereotypes. So I don't think that these things, Danish culture and American culture are really that separate on these things. I think maybe in the States there's more of a tendency to get called out publicly now for humor that relies on stereotypes, and I think that's a good thing. Because I think and we'll talk about this more perhaps, but I think there's a sense now in the States, especially with the way that things are going politically, that punching down is not really okay anymore, right? If you're going to make fun of someone, you should probably be punching up, right? Yeah. I also think that we also can't discount the fact that in the States as well as other places, humor is about power, and jokes are about power, absolutely. And you said something that was interesting about how that there's a sense amongst Danes that if humor isn't really hurting someone directly, then it's okay. And I think that is also a question of power. Like, how does the joke teller know that this isn't really hurting somebody, right? And we can talk about, well, it's not hurting them sort of, in this direct physical way, or it's not hurting them, whatever. But when the culture rests on these kinds of stereotypes, and when it's okay to sort of stereotype in that way, and it becomes a source of humor, then we really don't know. I mean, we don't know how that's affecting them personally. We don't know how that's affecting their prospects in the larger culture. We don't know those things. And also we don't know how there's a thing, called internalized racism, right? Or prejudice, where people direct that sort of larger humor at themselves. And that can be really harmful as well in terms of the way they understand themselves as part of a culture and a community.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what you said in your introduction resonated with some of the experiences I've had as well. This is in some ways about anecdotal experiences. I would say that my personal journey through academia, in many ways, I started at the University of Southern Denmark in 2000. Right before 9/11, right? And so I think there's been a really, if you look at Danish culture and Danish politics, there's been a really important shift during the time that I have been at the university. And I came from small town Denmark to a university setting in Odense, and sort of lived through the ramifications of 9/11, the way that Danish political system and the divisions of power shifted, with the Danish People's Party coming into power just 2 months after 9/11. And shifting the rhetoric and in many ways sharpening divisions and thoughts about different ethnic groups and differences in Denmark in the years afterwards. While I at the same time started thinking, I think, a little bit more critically about culture and about rhetoric and the way that I interacted with different groups and then had some opportunities to spend time in the U.S., right? So between 2000 and now, I've probably like lived 4 or 5 years in the U.S., and part of it has been on the East Coast and part of it has been on the West Coast, where the awareness of differences and the importance of taking minority voices seriously is emphasized in many different ways, especially within a university setting. So I think I have become even more aware perhaps of some of the things that Erin was talking about, the importance of power and minority perspectives in relation to a white majority who are talking about minorities in either as allies or as, in some aspects, adversaries in terms of how to maintain power.
Yeah. For me personally, being an immigrant in Denmark, my parents came here in '86 and I was born here in '95.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it's a kind of a funny thing because I always had shifting opinions on this matter because growing up in Denmark, I never went to a daycare because my mom actually kind of saved money on that. She saved money on that, so I actually didn't interact with people at my own age before I was 5-6 years old. That's a long time span where you're not interacting with other people. And I remember the cultural shock when I came to the kindergarten, and actually because what people characterize the way that, especially immigrants, they are raised up in Danish society, especially if you're Tamil or Muslim, it's a very conservative upbringing, and that is ultimate respect to your parents. You never swear or anything. I never learned to swear until I was in school. So I remember the culture shock when I came to the kindergarten and just kids being evil, calling you stupid or racist things, and I actually didn't know what these kind of words mean. But you always get that it's in a negative connotation. So I remember a lack of tolerance from my side because I just couldn't see the other side of the fence, that this is just meant to be in fun. So I totally get if you have a different culture, this is a really hard thing to get accustomed to, especially in Denmark, because people are kind of free in the way they talk, especially the hygge racism and something. All said and done, now I'm 23 years old, and I actually appreciate Danish humor now. And it's a kind of a funny story, because how did I get from that to a whole nother place? And I like the way that you can always be at ease with people, despite color or race or gender or whatever it is. But I do realize in the US, race just plays a it has a much bigger part in everything. And that's why I think the essential differences between American PC culture and Danish humor is so different, because the Danish society hasn't had the problems when it comes to, I did it with the quotation marks.
Since you don't have a webcam in here.
Yeah, we don't have a camera. We should.
We haven't blown up globally yet.
Yeah, we should get it done at some point. But because immigrants weren't coming to Denmark before the 60s with the Turks, but because Denmark was a country where they were actually looking for work for blue-collar workers, and they got that from Turkey. So the whole thing about the racial question in Denmark is a fairly new problem compared to many other countries, and that's why I think that the humor, like the Danish humor, where it's based on sarcasm, it's so sarcastic and ironic that it doesn't work in many other countries. So.
For me, I think the big difference when it comes to Danish humor is that I get this idea where you don't know when you're making fun of minorities, or if there is internalized racism. But for me, it has always been about how the joke is portrayed, because I always see it as, if you do it in the right way, you're basically not making fun of minorities, but you're making fun of the structures that's building up. So if I'm going to make some kind of jokes that's built on racism, I will more make fun of how for example, the Danish folk party, I will make fun about how they are thinking about racism and make the joke about how absurd it is to think in this way.
And that's a matter of punching up instead of punching down.
Exactly.
That's a great example, right? So looking at these structures of power that deal with minorities in really kind of like absurd and cruel ways, that is a really great example of pretty like solid, sophisticated humor that takes aim at the structure instead of at the people who are suffering from it.
I think, an interesting concrete example that's circulating at the moment, right, was just posted by one of Erin's colleagues recently, having to do with the poster that is everywhere about the Danish People's Party, right? Or a minority perspective on suppression of gay rights on a global scale, and to an extent a lack of equality for homosexuals, right? And that people have taken that commercial with the four white men and taken aim at that a little bit and joked about it. If you didn't know any better, this would be a really nice.
I think there were two gay couples.
It's a nice situation with just a couple of gay men having a good time.
I always use the Danish folk party. Their posters every year for Christmas, where we have a bunch of Tamil friends. I have some bunch of Tamil friends in my hometown, and when I make an event on Facebook, I always put a cover photo of Danish People Party, the poster they use every year. Yeah. So I always post that one just for humor. Yeah. So, there's definitely not because I'm not trying to argue there isn't racism in Denmark. Yeah. There is, but I would say that it is. Remarkable it's a significant minority, which is a problem because you can tell, especially if you're an immigrant, you can tell when someone is actually making fun of you in a positive light, like they're trying to have fun with you, and then someone who's just sneaking in a really racist thing, trying to say something really racist in a subtle way. You can actually tell these kind of things. So, and the way the Danish folk party they do it, it's really subtle.
It's borderline.
Yeah, it's really borderline.
Yeah, but I would also build on that because it is a funny story about how we as a group here started our podcast and how we started to communicate with each other. Because I would say that a lot of the Danish humor is built on sort of creating communities between individuals, and we are different in every kind of way, political, racial, or any kind of philosophical. But the things that sort of united us in becoming friends and a small community of friends was actually our humor and our way of seeing the world. So I would say that a lot of Danish humor is built on acknowledging the elephant in the room, acknowledging our differences in some ways, in a racial kind of way, saying, oh, there's a guy or girl different from me, looking different, and then I'm gonna sort of test the water and say some, as I mentioned before, the racist humor we have in Denmark, the hygge racism, and if the person sort of takes it in, evaluates it, and looks at it and says, oh, it was just in pure fun, then sort of friendship is built on that. I would not say that all friendship is built on how many racial jokes can you take before
before you break.
Yeah, before the person breaks. But I would say that it's sort of a bit. I believe the best analogy is acknowledging our differences by sort of poking fun of them, but not in a hostile way. Not saying, "Oh, because you're different, that means you are less, and I'm gonna make fun of you." But saying that, "Oh, we are different," but in a sense of humor, something we can unite around. And I would say that in our creation of friendship, we use sort of racial humor all the time, but in a sort of...
It's always in an ironic manner, because you have to remember, because one of the things the ironic humor does is not it's not making fun of what you say, minorities or people who are oppressed or victims. It's somehow making light of the absurdity that people actually think like that.
Exactly.
Because that's the thing, because we're not making fun of those people, we're actually making fun of the people who actually think like that. Because that's funny.
A great example is the Danish folk party poster, where actually a few weeks back we sort of made this fun that there's a poster here in Odense circling around where these 4 guys is sitting around the table and eating dinner, and it says at the bottom, in Denmark we celebrate Christmas. And Danes celebrate Christmas and all that stuff. And then I remember looking at Dinesh and say, Dinesh, do you celebrate Christmas? No, not in the same Danish traditional way. Oh, then you're not a Dane. because that is this sort of racial fun, but it is.
It's not.
Then again, it is punching up in some sense.
Right, but I mean, so from my perspective, I mean, just with the. And it's not really, I mean, look, like I'm American, but I'm also a resident of Denmark. And the work I do is with people who have recently immigrated and are going through the asylum system, right?
Yeah.
And I will tell you that, if you want a really good perspective on this sort of thing, maybe you should be talking to someone who's really new, right? I was speaking with one of my interlocutors who I work with at a center in Copenhagen with, and he's originally from Nigeria. He left because of political violence, and he had family members who were murdered. And he left. His mother said, "You have to leave," and he went to Libya, and he was in prison, and he crossed the Mediterranean, and then he was in Italy for a couple of years, and he said, and then I came to Denmark, and I didn't know what cruelty was until I came here.
Okay.
And for him, I think, I can't speak for him, but I can speak for other people. I've spoken to another colleague of mine who has works on histories of race and in institutional settings like Danish museums and how things are collected in these sorts of colonial histories. And her experience of what Denmark has been like has been eye-opening, and that's like the best way of putting it. It's also been very uncomfortable, and that's also a nice way of putting it. It's been difficult. And I think, humor, like any sort of cultural practice, is intricately linked with people's experiences of the larger culture. So even if, let's say, we're talking about things like equality in terms of access to financial security or political participation, and let's say all things being equal across the board, people, let's say an immigrant, eventually gets that kind of access to economic stability and political participation and cultural participation. When there is this sort of humor circulating, even if it's meant to sort of punch up and look at the structures, you also have to take into account that this person also comes from a whole other set of cultural practices around humor and is experiencing themselves as a particular body, as a person who carries particular histories in a Danish context where maybe this kind of rhetoric and discourse and conversation is not familiar. And also humor is one of those things that also structures and continues to structure different kinds of hierarchies and who gets to say what to whom, and how people, move through the world, how they feel in their bodies, how they're read by other people. And so I feel like, this idea of punching up and making fun of the Danish People's Party and something, yes, absolutely. Like, let's punch up. But it was, the same thing with when Charlie Hebdo, when that happened, right?
Yeah, remember that.
Yeah, and that was a real moment. I remember we read something about this, right? Because we were like, oh my God. Everyone was horrified, right? And there was no excuse for that happening. There's nothing. And at the same time, we read this really wonderful and powerful piece that was exactly about this thing about about this kind of the power of humor and representation, and how when a group of people is sort of stigmatized, even if it's supposed to be funny or satirical, there is sometimes a backlash, and that this idea of punching up rather than punching down at people who are already, because of the bodies they're born into, because of the countries they're born in, are already going to have an extra time kind of dealing with Denmark or somewhere like it, right?
I totally agree with you, because that's why I came with the example of when I was younger, because the whole thing about the culture shock. If you're not accustomed to Danish culture, you should not be talking to these people like the way you would talk with someone else. I totally get that. Because it is really, really confusing. Because I know a lot of people too. I have a lot of friends who when they came to Denmark, they were also shocked because they're not used to being talked. Because in their eyes, it's more like talking without respect to each other. They don't understand the humor and that sort of thing. That takes time. It takes time to actually get culturally adapt to a society. So I totally get that.
Yeah, and I think one of the great things about the Three Free Thought podcast that we have here, right? I mean, that humor is like a really interesting case of where to test some of the boundaries and the people's expectations about how to interact with each other, right? Because stand-up comedy, for example, thrives on and sometimes receives energy from testing people's boundaries and speaking about people's differences and making fun of those, and very, very clearly, like one of the main tropes of stand-up has to do with differences between men and women. And again, anecdotally, had an experience in New York City, one of the liberal capitals of the U.S., right, in the Village of all places, right, where the main resource of what New York City is in that locality has to do with stand-up comedy. The comedy is that place, and so I went there with a good friend of mine, also a good friend of Erin's, that is a professor in New York, and he said, if we're going to be two relatively young men walking into a comedy club, they're going to make fun of us in the Village as being a gay couple. I said, well, let's just go with that experience. And we got a front row seat. And the first joke that came at us was like, are you enjoying yourself? And we said, yes, you don't look like it. That's fine. And then the second one was like, are you here on a date? I was like, let's just roll with it. I said, of course we are. And then the comedian said, that's great, this is the Village. If you're not sucking dick, you're a bigot. And that's just like then you sort of roll with it, and that was the entire evening of sort of like making jokes about race, about ethnicity, about sexuality, and that was funny from our perspective, and I mean, of course I can't speak for anybody else, but that was a key part of stand-up culture. And that being said, I also live and have been born and raised in Denmark, so the experience and thinking critically about Danish history in relation to minorities, I think, is really important. If you take Danish history seriously, as I try to do with the post-colonial era in the Danish West Indies, the way that the black people have been talked about historically, have been written about from Henrik Cowling, one of the main Danish journalists, right? I mean, it's about all the stereotypes about race that you could possibly find from the main white supremacy websites that would circulate as of this contemporary moment. But those sorts of tropes were generally accepted in Danish society for a long time, and perhaps to an extent still is not totally dispelled. And of course, then there's been a shift in the 60s with the people that are the main minority within Danish borders. But I think the point about Danish culture being reflected in Danish humor is an important one. But the power dynamics is one that has long historical roots, and white supremacy, in some ways, being a part of that, even if it's generally swept under the carpet.
Yeah.
So I think I just wanted to sort of say that we have discussed the topic of humor and political correctness and all this, but I really wanted to go along and begin to talk about the cases that we have brought forth, because we have sort of discussed amongst ourselves how far can humor and political correctness go, and when do where are the limits and boundaries and borders, and what should be done when we cross a limit or a boundary. So before we set up this podcast today, we brought forth the Mustafas kiosk case, where we sort of I don't know if Erin, you had it on your Facebook page.
Yeah,
if
so
you
I
want
can
to
tell the story. So Anders and I have a daughter together named Zia, and she's 3. And she goes to Bonahea like 3-year-olds do, except for Danish when he was 3.
I wasn't at
Like,
Banahel, but
yeah.
it was the daycare.
It was the daycare, yeah. But mad props to your mom for saving some money. That's right.
Yeah.
So I dropped her off one day, and I was putting away her mail pocket, and I saw this book on the sofa, and I was like, what fresh hell is this? So I picked it up, and it was Mustafas kiosk, and you can imagine, I'm hoping you'll put up a picture of the front cover on your podcast website so people can see what this looks like. And I guess what I should probably say, too, is like, okay, yeah, I'm American. Okay, yeah, I'm like super lefty. I'm also half Lebanese. And I come from a long line of men and women who kind of resemble Mustafa in some way, you know, like there's definitely, like, I saw that, I was like, that's a caricature of, like, my dad, right? And I was like, but wait, Mustafa, like is holding a scimitar and also has a turban on and is selling tubal. I don't know, like, semiotically what is happening here.
With
like,
a rat on the fridge.
With a rat on the fridge. Like, where is he from? Who is he? What is his background? It's very confusing. So I kind of paged through the book, and I told Zia not to look at it, and then I left, and I posted on Facebook, and I was like, Danish friends, please explain this to me. I'm really having a hard time understanding why this is at my child's Bonahea. And then all hell broke loose, and here we are today.
Yeah. So anyone who, if you were at your 20s to 30s, you probably have seen this book in your kindergarten. I remember it clearly and remember enjoying the book.
Yeah.
So, and for me, I guess you could call it a quota of Facebook debates I participate in. Yeah, I don't really like those debates. It never really goes to plan. But somehow I just felt compelling to just join the debate.
Did a good job.
Yeah, and because when I saw the book, I just laughed because I remembered this book. So obviously it didn't. My alarm wasn't ringing when I saw it, but when I saw the cover of this book, I could see. Yeah, it's kind of wrong.
Yeah,
it's wrong. It probably wouldn't be published today. Let's just say that. And then I was writing because I get that it's kind of a red alert with the cover, but it was published in 1999, and the fact is, in 1999 there wasn't really anything focusing on.
Sure.
PC culture or just there was PC culture, but it wasn't so prevalent in Denmark. It was before 9/11, so you could get away with a lot of things.
The point, that I think I was trying to make also previously, right? That there's been an interesting and I think a positive shift in the way that people think about differences in Danish culture over the last 20 years, but. That being said, there's also been a really marked shift in political culture that is in some ways reflected. But I think that it's interesting that you say now, looking at it, being 23 years old, being in a university setting, you're looking at that cover critically now and saying, no, maybe it is problematic, maybe it wouldn't be or shouldn't be published. Because I was just in the classroom yesterday, I think, talking about Bourdieu's notion of distinction and the way that people slowly but surely with university degrees or education gain some sort of edification or general community where they start thinking critically about the way that symbols are used, about visual representations. And so when Casper goes back to his hometown, he carries with him a personal history of having been in a university setting that some of his closest friends perhaps doesn't. When I go back to my small town Denmark community, and go into a locker room at a soccer club, I hear a lot of comments also that having been removed from that town and that sort of everyday conversation by being in a setting like this, it is also oftentimes a little toe-cringing to be part of. I think that's important to keep in mind that we think about some of these things slightly differently because we have had experiences here, but there's also at least been some sort of shift in Danish culture between 99 and 2018.
Yeah, and one of the most interesting things about this case is when you look at the comments, because it's just a pure shitstorm of people just trying to bury each other, and
that
I loved
happens
it.
on my page.
Yeah, I just love it. I really thrive on this chaos, but.
You can make arguments on the internet. It's like there's no conclusion or people can't agree on anything. And
I will say something though. And one thing that was surprising to me about some of the comments. I know we're going to get into this. I know you're itching, Dinesh. I can tell. You're like, let's read some of these things. But some of these comments were made by people who are extremely educated, have taught at universities, and are still defending these images. Yeah. People who have worked in the Middle East in like really powerful positions who we know and who are still kind of defending this book, which I thought was really fascinating.
Yeah, and I think it totally is. And then I think the flip side or the positive spin on it also is that some of these people, also some of the people that hadn't been in a university setting, actually being open-minded enough to see different perspectives and gaining empathy from that thread.
That's true.
And then
I can think of one in
concluding with like, I would love to have a conversation about this. Now, being a white Dane that has been in many ways privileged throughout life without having to relate to the world from a minority perspective, I am now thinking more about the world and more broadly about the world than just. That's right.
Yeah, that was Denmark. Really refreshing. Yeah, it was kind of amazing. Yeah.
I mean, both sides of the fence on this case. They really made some inappropriate comments, and that's what I found really interesting because I just saw both sides of the fence just go too far. One side doing its best to defend the book, even though they kind of know it is racist. I have nothing against when you're just saying, I just love this book because it reminds me of my childhood and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that's okay. But just, you can admit that it's kind of racist. But
I would say that in the case of this book, would it help to sort of remove it or censor it in any kind of way to sort of... But it sounds like this book is creating a lot of discussion, and it says a lot about the history we had in Denmark, where it was openly okay to make these caricatures, and removing or censoring this kind of material and books, would it sort of just create a lid on these topics and just sort of push them down in the if you could say in the shadows, so it would not come to light? Because I remember we in our second episode discussed the case of Mark Twain's Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, where they censored out the N-word, where people intellectuals started discussing, but then you remove the whole idea, the context of the story and the time and the historical time.
No, if I just like chime in really quickly, I think from a historian's perspective, usually like removing stuff from the past is like counterproductive in many ways. What I really want is like an honest conversation about the dynamics and the power relations. And one of the, I'm ashamed to say that I have not seen Black Panther, but one of the things that was so powerful about that was that young black kids were able to see a superhero.
That's right.
In black with black skin, right, and was able to visualize portrayals of black superheroes, and if you had like a superhero Muhammad or Mustafa on the front page of numerous children's books, that would be really cool as well. But you don't see that balance, I think, as of this present moment.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with that. Like, I don't want that book in my kids' Bonahea. I don't. She has, I mean, she's going to have enough of this stuff coming up, along with her, that I think there's a marked difference between kids reading Mark Twain with the N-word and at like junior high or high school level, right, where there can be some critique and some conversation about language and this sort of, and rhetoric and like what words like this do and the context, like you said, the context is so important. My kid doesn't know that. She's 3, and so we can talk about this. We talk about bodies all the time, and like different bodies come in different shapes and sizes and colors, and like people wear different things, and it's all good, it's all love. But like she can't know that. So if that's read to her, and I mean, she looks like a little Viking, right? Like she did not get a drop of the Lebanese-ness. Like it's just not there. So she's like she's at home, in a Danish barnehage. But I want her to know about the world in a far more compassionate way than this is. And I know that people say that, well, within the book, there are jokes about Danish fathers being like fat and bald and blah, blah, blah. But like that isn't the same thing, like when you're in a Danish context, like it's not, again, this is like a question of power and hierarchies, right? So like making fun of a white dude is like white dudes like all respect to the white dudes in the room, but white dudes like historically have wielded a ton of power, like it's sort of like having like some kind of superhero power where these things are like not going to affect like your place in the world, right? Whereas like poking fun of Mustafa, I don't know where Mustafa comes from. I'm still very confused about this, but like making fun of Mustafa's like big nose or his whatever is relying on these like really tired stereotypes that are just like, why do we still need these? I don't think it should be censored. I don't think it should be taken out or burned. We're not going to burn books. That's not what we're talking about. But I think this sort of open conversation, like it would be good to see some conversation about this in the Danish media, and I think there has been, but more kind of contemporary, like in this moment, because it's still at schools. I will also say that there have been recent cases that pertaining to literary greats, where people have started to question like whether their name should be on particular awards, for example. So there's the who is the woman?
Must have been an intellectual journey for you, also loving the Little House on the Prairie. And
exactly,
then,
Anders. That's right. That's exactly what I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
What's her face?
Laura Ingalls Wilder.
Laura Ingalls Wilder, right? And like I love Little House on the Prairie. Okay, so and the way that she talks about Native Americans is like horrendous. And now I know that, but they've taken her name off of a literary prize.
I think so.
Oh, they've changed it.
The Librarians Association.
That's right, the Librarians Association. Also, in England, they've taken Roald Dahl's name off of something as well, because he went on record, I think during the 30s, or maybe it was later, perhaps in the 50s, saying kind of sympathizing with Hitler in some way, right? So now they're challenging that too, and absolutely like. There are plenty of other writers, right, who we can put up as sort of exemplars of how to deal compassionately with the world, and the world being difficult and the world being messy. We don't need to keep, sort of repeating the cycle. We don't need to keep reifying these people. But absolutely, I mean, sames. Like, I love those books, and I love that series, and yeah. And I think that she should absolutely, her name should absolutely be taken off this award.
Would you read it to your daughter?
Not now. Absolutely not. I mean, I think if she came across it later on and wanted to read it, we could read it together and we could talk about these things. Mm-hmm. But she's 3, and no, I don't want her seeing those kinds of things. I don't think she's at a point right now where she can critically assess what is good literature, first of all, given the stuff that we read to her right now. Like, if I have to read Green Eggs and Ham one more time, I might do myself in. But I mean, but absolutely, I mean, I want her to be able to read Huck Finn, and these sorts of things, and I want us to be able to talk with her about it and have conversations about representation and race and history.
Exactly.
And maybe this thing is going to stick around, her Barnehage, but I would like her Barnehage to have other possibilities, other books, right? Which we should really donate to her school, I think.
The superhero Mustafa.
I'm telling you,
Yeah.
we should write it. Yeah. So.
Kryptonite is bacon.
Oh my god.
I mean, that would be obvious.
This is a really wonderful example for this podcast. Oh my goodness gracious. Right.
So right there we have this some comic relief.
Yeah.
So right there
Can
we
be
have
serious all the time.
an example of where the limits sort of should be focused on kindergarten and children not being exposed to this sort of material at a very young age, where you can't discuss the whole context of sort of these elements.
Right.
So yeah, that was actually very interesting to hear, because I read a lot about these bloggers and intellectuals talking about how the case is in Sweden. They are sort of trying to censor a lot of very beloved children's books, like and stories like what is it called? Pippi
Longstocking.
Yeah, Pippi Longstocking and I can't even translate all these.
Yeah.
Emil from what?
Just say Lønneberg.
Yeah, Lønneberg, and all these very beloved children's stories, where I think you're taking it a bit too far, because I know there are some racial connotations which are not okay in these stories, but completely censoring the words or cutting out people from the stories, it sort of it removes the possibility for discussing these topics and why they are not okay in today's time. And I think it's a very good point to make, that maybe for children these materials should not be available in the same kind that they are in high school level, for example.
Yeah.
But I would say censoring it is going the wrong way. It's crossing a line which should not be crossed.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that there's so many possibilities for books that deal with difference for kids, that like we don't have to recycle these things. Like I remember seeing books in my great aunt's house growing up on like Little Sambo and things like the Tar Baby, right?
Yeah.
And like I read those as a kid, and I was like, I didn't know what I was looking at. Like Brer Rabbit was mischievous, and there was this Tar Baby. I did not understand it as a racial stereotype, right? I didn't. But as I got older, now I look back and I'm like, well, thank God that wasn't circulated in my school. It wasn't what we read. Those were like books from like the 60s that she still had lying around. And they weren't, burned or censored. I mean, they're part of this kind of cultural history, but the fact of the matter is that the landscape is changing, and, the needs of the larger society are changing as people immigrate and desire to be a part of Denmark and in the ways that they can. And so it's like, well, let's just do better.
I'm pretty sure that book was in my school and my kindergarten.
Yeah.
And when I'm looking back on it, because that's the book I remember it was.
Which one? The
Little Sambo.
Sambo, yeah.
And I was like,
Little Black
whoa,
Sambo.
that's racist.
That's a crazy book. That's a crazy book.
If you haven't seen it, try to look it up, because that's extremely racist.
That's
All
it.
the paintings are basically just blackface.
Yeah.
It's
That's where I'm kind of disgusted by what the fuck is going on here.
I think that's like the importance of what we were talking about, like with having the historical perspective on what Danish society was and what was socially acceptable and has been, and how the change has happened with greater reflection on differences and also, to an extent at least, even if it's not always the case from a political standpoint, but a respect for differences.
Totally. But, in the States, and like this idea of like PC culture in the States, like, can we just do away with that? Because the States is not necessarily, like, there are pockets, right? And then you have things like, I saw on Facebook the other day, one of my friends posted a picture of her kid at his Thanksgiving Day pageant. Kid is not Native American. He sure as hell was wearing feathers, and there's still this sort of like those sorts of narratives, like, oh, the Pilgrims and the Natives came together for this Thanksgiving feast, and like, and then genocide and like smallpox and like,
Really.
You know what I mean? And but there's still this story that's told at that level, and people dress up in like as pilgrims and quote unquote Indians, which is like, we still haven't like done away with that. We don't have to give them all the gruesome details, but there are better ways of talking about these things.
That was
Well,
also
I think
what.
it resonates with a lot of people at this table as
Yeah,
well.
we talked
Yeah.
about it in
romantic
episode 2
references.
also.
Yeah.
What you say?
We talked about exactly this
Yeah.
issue in episode
Yeah.
2 about political correctness and
Yeah.
PC culture in America.
Yeah.
And I actually got the same perspective that you got, Erin, and
Yeah.
I don't think PC culture is that big of a problem in America.
No.
I think it's more taking these small examples and basically just putting them completely out of
Contact.
yeah,
Yeah.
and blowing them up to a level where it doesn't start. I mean, I think it's. I don't think it's that big of a problem. I think a lot of these issues are just small issues that were put in the media, and all of a sudden, that's the look of you got of America as an entirety.
Yeah.
But
You
yeah,
should talk about the thing you
actually,
just told me today.
because in our second episode, we discussed the how much does it
How much?
yeah.
How big of a problem is the?
how big of a
PC
deal
culture?
is this political
Yeah.
correctness movement
Yeah.
and all these and I agree on one half with Bobber, Christopher, Bobber as we call him, that it is not that big of a deal when people are just outraged on the internet or discuss the range of what we can say and cannot say. But I also agree with Danish on this idea that how large this movement or these pockets of people are,
And where they reside.
and where they can be a small community or a small group, but if they voice their opinion to the right people, they can change a whole lot of things by law. And it is at that point where I start to think we gotta make a limit or a boundary here, because I read an article last night about the University of Copenhagen, where they have made it. They had sort of looked at all these parties they had on the university ground, and said that there's some Halloween parties, and we have this fastelavn, where they dress up as Indians, Native Americans, and cowboys, and Mexicans, yeah. And people had complained about this because it was racial stereotypes, and it was racist, and they didn't want to see it. And that's all good. If you don't want to see it, I get that. That's stereotypes, and I can completely understand the idea. But they had complained to the HR department, where they sort of took both teachers, professors, and staff members in, and sort of had these talks with them, and they wound up sort of banning these costumes, and actually made it possible for students to be suspended, or what was the last part? Completely drop out, made them kicked out, of this university for dressing up as these stereotypes. And it is in the University of Copenhagen's rule book now. You can't do this, and at that point, it sort of affects not me personally, but or physically, but it affects my point of view on this matter, and I go the complete opposite way. Now I sort of wish that, how can I explain this? If we said that I was on the side of people being outraged about these things and say, you can't do this, we should have an honest debate about these matters, I'm on this side. But when this becomes law, in universities and in governments and stuff like that, I go to the other side and say, now I feel like we should push for more freedom to say what we want and do stuff like this. And I would just like to pose a question about when we push the limits into the lawmaking part, a lot of people go the other way and start becoming extremists. And I actually believe, in a larger perspective, that is what is happening in the United States today, that sort of universities and laws are being created on the left side and pushing people to the right side, because maybe they had the sympathy to discuss these matters. But right now they are becoming laws, and I know it is a small pocket of people discussing these.
No, it's not small. I just think the idea of like PC culture is just not very accurate. Like, I don't think, I think the same thing with like people being called like social justice warriors. It's they're just really derogatory terms the way that they're used. If people are interested in social justice and speak truth to power, they get labeled in this way that's like very patronizing. And the same thing with PC culture. I mean, it's like being politically correct has come to carry this sort of like burden, whereas like really you could just say people are just historically conscious and working for positive change. But I'd like to, if you want to speak to this, I have an example from UCSD that I could talk about.
Yeah, that's the one I thought about.
Yeah.
As well. But yeah, I think the main issue has to do with whether or not the way we started out the podcast, right? Are you punching up? Are you punching down in the way that you represent people? And I think the way that the reason that Copenhagen University got into this difficult situation had to do with the fact that they were perceived as having privileged Danish students punching down on minorities or portraying them in certain ways that was seen as being less respectful in a university setting. And that being said, having an open conversation about that without necessarily going straight to the codes of conduct and expelled, could have perhaps alleviated some of them, made people aware why it would be problematic, but it's definitely part of like the UCSD discussion also.
Yeah, so in 2010, we were both there, or I was at UCSD, but you were coming back and forth. There was a fraternity that held an event on campus called the Compton Cookout. And if you know anything about Compton, Compton is a historically black neighborhood, has seen a lot of violence over the years, has been reified in hip-hop and rap music, and has this sort of, there are stereotypes about this neighborhood which are often quite unflattering. This fraternity put out a Facebook post inviting people to this cookout that relied exclusively on stereotypes of Black Americans and Black women. So it was sexist, it was racist, it was classist. The language used in this invitation was so blatantly ugly. And there were massive protests on campus. Kids came down from high schools in Compton to protest. I'd never seen our campus so politically active and people so united. What is the administration going to do about this? Because there is this feeling, I can only speak to my experience on American campuses especially, but there is a feeling that these are places where there should be debate, but where everyone should feel safe, right? And like safe meaning they don't feel like they are going to be stereotyped or physically attacked for the way that they look, for the gender that they are, for what they are wearing, for what they, for their background, for any of these things. And when you have a cookout that is going to be attended by mainly white students dressing up as Black stereotypes, right? In the 21st century, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
You're inviting a lot of this can spiral, right? And also it's 2010. I cannot believe that this is we're still doing this sort of stereotyping and having a party around bring your watermelon, bring your fried chicken, stuff like that. Not even kidding, right? And so that fraternity was suspended, and I think eventually shut down. Because this is a really big debate that I've gotten into with some of our friends as well about the difference between free speech and hate speech, right?
Exactly.
Hate speech is not free speech. Hate speech incites stereotyping, it incites bigotry, it incites violence. And you can have debates about representations. But when you are reliant, and also it's just so cheap, it's this sort of stuff is so cheap. That's the best you can do really to have a good time is to dress up in sombreros and act like the drunk Mexican stereotype with the mustache and the poncho. Like, that's the best you can do to dress up like a sexy geisha. Are you kidding me? Evolve. There are better ways of doing things. And so I think that is a really good example. I mean, there was absolutely debate and there was absolutely conversation, but I think in a university setting, again, this is sort of this question of like, where are you aiming your critique? Are you going to aim it at the structures of power that are now, that you see at work at the states now, at the border with people looking for asylum and getting tear gassed? Like, are you going to take aim at those structures, or are you going to take aim at the people who are like actually affected by these forces? It's just a question of like, of where you want to direct the power that you have, right? Like, what kinds of conversations do you want to have? And are you going to take this like cheap road that relies on easy old stereotypes, or are you going to try to like get the humor to evolve and change the discourse?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the...
Then I just have it's sort of a direct question to what you just said, because I actually, it opened up some of my views on this point. But I just wanted to sort of test the boundaries once again. So if it was about power and position and context of what you dress up as, would it be okay for a minority to dress up as a... I just got to switch it around. Would it be okay for a minority to dress up as a low-income welfare redneck, for example?
No!
Say we're going to have a Louisiana swamp cookout with crocodiles and banjos.
Absolutely, and that's what I'm going to say. Like, these like white trash parties, just as problematic.
Yeah.
Like they are classist or often sexist. They rely on these gross stereotypes. We both lived in the Midwest. Like, I have met a ton of people in like southern Indiana who would fit a lot of those stereotypes, right? And they are people, and they are compassionate, and they are complex, and they are, not necessarily like Confederate flag waving, Daisy Duke wearing, car, pickup truck driving, beer swinging, or maybe they do some of those things, but the trigger happy, right? Exactly. Maybe they do some of those things, but they're still human beings.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that me and Bob would discuss, because I'm on the side, you can actually dress up as these things as long as it doesn't get stereotypical. That means you can dress up as a Mexican, just don't be drunk or rapey.
No, don't dress up as a Mexican. If you are not Mexican, do not be dressing up as a Mexican.
See, that's where I disagree, because I think you can. I think that's a fine line between actually trying to celebrate a culture and actually be provocative against them. Because
how would you respectfully dress up as a Mexican?
Traditional Mexican garments. You can do that,
okay,
as long as you don't do the cocaine drug dealing poncho, the whole drug dealing facade. I'm totally against that. I'm totally against that, because if someone if a white people. I have traditional Tamil garment at my house. If a white person wanted to wear that, I wouldn't be...
But there it is. There's the thing. Like, if let's say you invited a friend to be like, come to my family gathering, here's a garment. Okay. But, like, if you're going to have, like, a Cinco de Mayo celebration at SDU, which Cinco de Mayo is, like, a super, like, American thing. It's not necessarily a Mexican thing. Then like, you better have a Mexican friend who's like, let us celebrate my culture.
Yeah, I mean, that's okay. I think there's a fine line between them, because I think sometimes both sides gets it sometimes wrong, where sometimes they view it as, it's just for fun, then let's just be as racist as possible because it's all in good fun. No, I'm not into that, but I'm also not into the people who says, well, anything that is not in your own culture, that's racist. I'm not in that boat either. I think there's a fine line between those two things.
Yeah, I just think that, like, trying on other people's cultures, you can take those things off. Do you know what I mean? Like you can put them on and take them off, and that's where you have to be really, really careful.
Because
with, like,
I actually remember one of the first lectures with you where the Halloween was upcoming.
I
and I remember
talking to.
the PowerPoint show where don't dress up as these things, and I actually had a really bad first impression, and I was like, oh no, really?
That was, yeah.
No,
I
really?
remember that. I was just like, do better. Like,
Yeah.
And that's where, cultural appropriation. Like, there's a way to honor
Yeah.
other cultures, and there's a way to appropriate them, and that is something that we can just all do better, right? We can just do better.
That's why I don't like what the Copenhagen University did, because they never really made a system of conduct of, well, it's okay to dress up as other cultures, just don't do it derogatory, which I think that's what they meant, but it's not precise enough, because now it's just, well, what can you wear now?
Yeah, well, then you dress up as your own culture,
I think it's okay, because
dress up like Vikings or something. I don't know. Like,
I actually have a case, and we talked about this case. We follow the NBA, me and Rasmussen, and Jeremy Lin, who's a Chinese basketball player, had dreadlocks for 2 or 3 years. You don't like that? Because he had the dreadlocks for 2 or 3 years,
I know.
And at some point, NBA sports analyst Kenyon Martin, well, he was like, "Well, look at you. You're wearing dreadlocks. Stop trying to be a black guy. You're not black." But then the hypocrisy just got highlighted towards him, because Jeremy Lin then posts a picture of him and then highlights a Chinese tattoo he has. Yeah. So where do we go? Where do we go?
I think that's really interesting, right? I mean, if you look in a historical perspective, I mean, that people, are always standing on the shoulders of others. So, I mean, that cultures evolve based on transnational interaction in some different ways.
Do.
I mean, there is a lot of nuance, and it's difficult to come down really hard on one side or the other on debate. But, I mean, greater thoughtfulness and respect, I think, and an awareness of power dynamics and punching to the extent possible upwards instead of the other way would be helpful.
Yeah, and the great statement from Jeremy Lin. Then he writes this, I'm sorry if I offended you in any way, but I just felt that this was something that compliments me, and I always looked up to the players in the NBA, and obviously he involved the photo of Kenyon Martin with his Chinese tattoo, and then he writes, by the way, I had a poster of you when I was a kid. Yeah, so that's where do we go? Because he's just appreciating someone else's culture, and I don't like to be in a scenario where we can't even do that because everything is labeled racist. I think that's not an answer.
Right. I mean, can I just also say, I mean, what Anders said is really important about the. Sorry, I know we're running out of time.
We have closing statements.
Right. Okay. So I mean, what Anders said too about like there's globalization, like people, like these sorts of symbols and practices circulate, and it's not like you can't go eat dim sum if you're not Chinese or something. You know what I mean? Like you can't learn how to cook whatever Thai food if you're not Thai, or Mexican food if you're not Mexican. Absolutely, but there's a difference between appreciation and appropriation, right? And that's where we have to do better. And I have examples from thinking about like Middle Eastern dancing, like belly dancing, and a lot of my white women friends have, in the past have performed in belly dance troupes, and then kind of realized that the way that things were being done wasn't necessarily true to the tradition or respectful, and they stopped in consciousness and wrote about it, which I thought was really interesting. And it's not that they don't appreciate it, or maybe they practice it, but they just won't perform it the way that some of these other troupes are doing. And that's a whole maybe other conversation. But yes, closing statements, I suppose, and we have to go and hang with Zia. Yeah.
I mean, this has been great to have you here.
Fun.
We just would love to have you back again, because I feel like we just scratched the surface.
Yeah.
We sort of came into this whole new topic we wanted to discuss also, and so the whole cultural appropriation talk.
Could be another podcast.
It could be a whole nother podcast episode of itself. So
and we actually got heated.
With love,
so
Dinesh,
yeah, I
with
know.
love.
do do you guys have anything to sort of close off with? Say any closing statements saying this has been boring. We will never come back.
I think the way that Erin opened the podcast, is a great way to end it also about this awareness again of power dynamics and structures, and then like the mutual awareness of the way that we in Denmark have interacted with people of different backgrounds.
Yeah.
And it's a real joy to talk to you all too, because I, remember you all from classes, and it's fun to be back at SDU and the sights, sounds, and smells of this place. And thank you so much for having us. This was a really fun conversation.
Yeah. It's a great work that you do.
Yeah, you
inside
guys are
and outside
awesome.
the classroom.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we are shortly gonna have a little break right now, and just want to say thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Thank you to our commercial partners.
Yeah, exactly.
MailChimp.
SeatGeek.com
MailChimp.
gives you the best seats in an NBA game.
Yeah, exactly. StubHub.
Yeah.
Yeah.